Interlochen Center for the Arts acknowledges that it occupies the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe Three Fighters Confederacy, and specifically the Ojibwe, Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. We pay our respects and give thanks to the past, present, and future traditional stewards of this land. Okay, and next I would like to share a poem I wrote. It's called We Wanted to Share, Not Tear. I would be happy to share with you. You can come to our powwows, though I know you're just browsing. We will take you on our Manuman canoe trips, and you can come to our ghost suppers where we eat that Manuman with corn soups or butternut squash, where we talk to our ancestors with sema at the fire and offer their favorite foods. Though I know you'll just film yourself pinching that sema in your right hand with the captions, #spiritual, #witchy, #bobo. You can help us set up the end of a young girl's berry fast, and we'll even smudge you down with mashkabeh mungashik when you want to help stay up at night to watch the fire of someone who needs guidance while walking on. Yet, you bring a drum, you walk around that fire and sing. You sing like you know what you're trying to sing, without knowing you're disrespecting my mother. You buy an authentic headdress, place it on your head, close your eyes, puff up your lips, and stick up 2 fingers in the air to represent peace. When in the past you never wanted peace. The language you think is exotic was beaten out of the children who just wanted to say bonjour. You cut our hair. Don't pretend that scars don't disappear. Miigwech, thank you.
Ani Bojo, Wabigonase Indishnikas, Magonidoro, Mavatini Donjala. Hi, my native name is Wabigonase or Whitewater Lily. I'm Bear Clan. I live near Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and I'm also a citizen of Sioux Tribe of Chippewa Indians. But as you all know me, hi, my name is Molly Estrick, and I'm a freshman pop music guitar major. Thank you. In Ojibwe culture, water lilies are deeply symbolic. They symbolize tranquility and serenity, remaining on the water's surface even in face of wind and rain, which represents resilience in the midst of chaos. The roots of a water lily were historically used for medicine, connecting the plant to healing and the importance of one's roots and heritage. And today I'll be talking to you about the history of Ojibwe jingle dress dancing and my involvement in it. So this is my, I kind of messed up, I didn't flip the slide, but this is my side of my traditional greeting. Okay, so we're going to the jingle dress origin story, for which, of those who don't know, this is a jingle dress. The jingle dress dance began with the Mill Logs Band in the early 1900s and became prevalent in the 1920s in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Ontario, Canada. The story is that the dress was first seen in a dream. A medicine man's granddaughter grew sick, and as the man slept, his native spirit guides came to him and told him to make a jingle dress for the girl. They said if the child danced in it, it would heal her. So the jingle dress was made, and the tribe came together to watch the child dance. At first, the child was too sick to dance alone, so her tribe carried her, but after some time, the girl was able to dance alone, cured of her sickness. The dance has since not only been a ritual of healing, but also one of pride. Jingle dresses, also known as prayer or medicine dresses, are believed to bring healing to those who are sick. The dress gets its name from the rows of metal cones sewn onto the dress, and as the cones hit one another, it sounds like rain falling. So it's important for the dancer to be light on their feet and to move in time with the drum and to stop when the beat stops. For those of you who don't know, that's what they sound like. So now I'll talk about my life in dancing. In 2015, when I was 4 years old, I went to my first powwow, and it was a huge crisis that I didn't have regalia like the other girls. So my friend Caliana shared her shawl with me, and that night my mom stayed up and gave me my first no-sew shawl regalia. So that one would be the very first picture with like the brown sheets and stuff. So that was my first regalia. The next weekend, I went to Sugar Island Powwow, where I saw jingle dress dancers for the first time. And after the jingle dress exhibition, I walked up to my mom with my 4-year-old attitude and said, "I'm supposed to be a jingle dress dancer." So, I did have an attitude. But then we got an appointment with a local medicine man to do a naming ceremony, and this is where I was named Bobby Guanace, and I got my clan and colors. My mom had learned how to make a very basic dress using my colors. Then for the next POW, however, there were no other jingle dresses there to teach me how to dance. But I was so confident at 4 years old that I danced alone in the jingle dress exhibition anyways. And then over winter 2016, we attended craft nights to learn more about making jingle dresses, and then we were able to complete a new one for summer 2017. So the sketch there, that was one that my mom did of my first dress, which you can see is the second picture and the third. So that was my first jingle dress itself. And then the pandemic happened, and POWs got canceled. But during that time, I borrowed a shawl regalia from a tribal elder, which was the very last picture of the shawls. But I danced so much, I frequently got powwow hangover, which feels like you can't walk, eat, and you feel sick, and overall like you feel awful for a day or two. And then between 2022 and 24, I got really serious with guitar and formed a band. So I didn't dance again until I was invited to be junior head dancer for my middle school's annual jingle. Shortly after that powwow, I was accepted to the Interlochen summer camp and then here. So I'm looking forward to spending time at home this summer to dance again, and I'm hoping that at this community meeting next year I can bring down one of our local drums and other dancers in different styles, so then we can do a demonstration. But before we end, I would like to highlight this. Starting in 1661, Native American children in government boarding schools, where they were forced to cut their hair, they were beaten, starved, and mass amounts were killed. Our languages were being suppressed, our dancing and powwow traditions were being suppressed, and it was all a part of the assimilation movement. The last boarding school in Michigan did not close until 1983 in Harbor Springs, 2 hours from here. Native people were not supposed to be Native people anymore. Our practices and our traditions, or even speak our language, laws in the early 1920s banned traditional dances and ceremonies in an attempt to force assimilation of the Native Americans into mainstream American society. 1923 legislation restricted the times of year where these dances could be practiced, deeming them a threat to Christianity. So I'd like to end by saying, despite powwows and our traditional dancing being suppressed by the government, Indigenous peoples created the jingle dress as a powerful symbol of resilience, hope, and the ability to heal through community and tradition, which I take very seriously, knowing what it took to be able to wear and dance in mine. Miigwech. I'll be introducing April Lindola. She is a Turtle Clan of the Grand River Six Nations. She is a department head and a full professor at Native American Studies at Northern Michigan University. In 2021, Lindola led the Great Lakes Indigenous Art Education and Healing Project with the Keweenaw Bay Ojibwa Community College. She earned her PhD in Rhetoric and Theory and Culture at Michigan Technological University. She earned a Master of Fine Arts degree in English from NMU and has had creative works published in numerous anthologies. Dr. Lindola is also a bead artist, powwow dancer, and a musician. So I'd like to welcome her to the stage.
What an amazing welcome. My goodness, not only am I introduced by individuals who are sharing words that are inspiring, but song and dance with the jingle dress dancers. So Annabella and Molly, let's give them a round of applause. I am so honored to be here today. I'll introduce myself in the language that I'm surrounded by because I'm a guest in Anishinaabe territory, and many of my teachers are Anishinaabe. So, Buju, Sego, April Lindalan Dishnakas, Mekanodadam. So as Molly shared with you, I'm Turtle Clan, but my mother was born and raised on the Grand River Six Nations Reserve in Ohsweken, Ontario. I grew up around powwow life, but I also grew up on a piano bench. So the arts was very, very important to my family and me. And it was a privilege to be able to be part of programs such as the ones that you are embracing right now at this amazing place, Interlochen Art Center. So for me, to be here is to kind of, in my own way, come full circle, to be able to share a little bit about who I am. Because when I was younger, these two worlds didn't often mix. And it wasn't until I attended university that I was able to flex some of my creative muscle and join that with some of my powwow life. So that began me on a journey to learn more about what Native peoples and voices have to offer our world. My talk is a little bit long and academic in title. Let's get to the good stuff though. What does it mean for you to be able to make a decision in how you wish to express yourself? As creators and makers, you all have agency to create something that's meaningful to you, but I might respectfully challenge you to say, how do you make things that are meaningful for the world that we want to live in together? For Indian people, as I was growing up, and as you heard Molly say, and Annabella say, there's been tensions. Because for Indian people, Indigenous people have had to navigate distortion of representation, dismissal of representation, or outright erasure of representation. So I use this comic strip as a sort of tongue-in-cheek way to visually remind us of the things that mainstream society has put out there to say this is what represents Native people, and I respectfully challenge that. What happens when Native people are in charge of how they choose to express themselves, as opposed to images such as we see on the screen that have been in place for, frankly, centuries, through paintings, through dime novels, of course through those Hollywood westerns, through many different facets of our life in popular culture. Indian people have been told what they look like by non-Native people. What I'm here to talk to you about today is the significance of expressive sovereignty. What does it mean for us as Indigenous people to be responsible for expressing ourselves, not just for ourselves, but to make the world a better place around us? A couple of quotes. Longtime documentary scholar Bill Nichols shares this quote: "If we lack familiarity with historical events whose semblance attaches to the sounds of images we view, then these images may lack referential power documentary requires of them." What's Bill saying here? Uncle Bill, kind of big words there. What's going on? What Bill Nichols is trying to argue is that if one person's history is considered normalized or familiar, and that's the only history that's told, then somebody else's history, perhaps introduction of boarding schools earlier today is one of those things, then that history is not as well known and you may not have a reference point for it. But I can tell you, as a person who grew up knowing that her mom's dad attended the Mohawk Residential School in Brantford, Ontario, I have grown up since this big, knowing about boarding and residential schools in the US and Canada. My reference point for my history is mine, and yours may be very different if it has been absent of those things. That's what Bill Nichols is attempting to say there. How do we come together and share our histories together so that we know how and who each other is to get to know each other better and have empathy for each other. Sterling Harjo is a showrunner of a television program entitled Reservation Dogs. Anybody here watch or see that film, Reservation Dogs? Yes, thank you. Oh my gosh. Some of you out there, if you haven't seen it yet, it is a gem. It is a treasure. Sterling Harjo is telling stories of contemporary indigenous people in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in and around where he grew up. And he really puts the camera and the audience in a space where many people have never been before. And it really has been an empowering movement in the last few years, and just few years, to see this kind of television taking place. Sterling says on his website, it's not up to Hollywood to change Native representation in the media. They have failed at it for decades. It's up to us, the artists, the filmmakers, the storytellers, and the activists. That power is ours alone. And with power comes responsibility, of course. And I would ask you to remind that as you endeavor on your maker journey through your career here at Interlochen. What if we disrupt that? Some of you with applause, how many of you heard of the film or the stories, The Last of the Mohicans? Yeah, lots of people have heard those stories. They have been very popular over the decades. So here is a cartoon artist who's going to challenge and disrupt that with, well, what about the first one? Because to say the last of the Mohicans is to signify and send a message that it's the end, that there are no more. And please trust me when I tell you that I have had students in my classroom say, I didn't know there were Native people still around. It happens. And so by having these messages mixed with pop culture and these understandings mixed with history, there becomes that operational erasure that I mentioned earlier, or distortion that I represented earlier. But I wanted to share this kind of humorous tongue-in-cheek cartoon to say, well, what if as a maker, I'm going to disrupt that narrative of the last? Let's talk about the first. Defining sovereignty. In my title, I had the phrase expressive sovereignty, but let's talk about sovereignty in and of itself. Sovereignty is kind of seen as a more political term, a legal political term. It means to govern oneself. A country has the right and authority to govern oneself, just as the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians have the right to govern themselves. The Grand Traverse Band of Indians down here in this territory have the right to govern themselves. It's been taken further by the artists. What does that mean for us in the world of making, in the world of expressing, in the world of representation? This is a picture by Nadia Quandabins, who's from northwestern Ontario. She's a photographer who in her series continually chooses to disrupt the narrative. And I use this image on purpose because as you can see, she is standing, the subject in this photo is standing tall and firm and still amidst a very, very busy tunnel. The photographer, Nadia Quandabins, does this on purpose and allows us some space to kind of think about what does that mean for that Indian woman to be standing tall and still and firm in her jingle dress in this very urban-centered space. She is making a decision to look into the camera. She's looking at you. She, in her own right as the subject, is deciding how she wants to express herself. Nadia Quandabins, with her wizardry and photography, things that I know very little about, is able to adjust the speed and the way that the outside of the people on either side of that dancer look like they're moving and blurring and moving and blurring. I equate this to a form of sovereignty in the sense that we have to move from just the political to stand firm as artists, particularly indigenous artists, to let that blurriness stay to the side. Know your path. Know what you want to do with your message. This subject does, this photographer does. So here are a few quotes from people I admire greatly. Jolene Rickard, Tuscarora scholar who teaches at Cornell University, says that previously the concept of sovereignty by indigenous civilizations has been used in that sense of self-renewal and the idea of resistance, because there's a constant pushing back of the main dominant narrative. And she's saying that she was one of the first to say, how do we do that as artists? How do I do that as a visual artist? Michelle Rahea says visual sovereignty locates indigenous cinema in a particular historic and social text, while privileging tribal specificity. Oftentimes when in the past there have been, not that long in the past, but maybe even currently, non-native producers will have a mix, if you will, of native people, non-named tribe, and it'll be not really identified as anything specific and distinct. There is a distinctiveness in the introductions that you heard today by the two young ladies who presented before me and then myself, because we come from distinct places, we come from distinct clans, we come from distinct nations. That specificity actually does mean something, and it's tied to place. Last but not least, Jesse Wenting, an Ojibwa film critic, writes narrative sovereignty is the idea that indigenous people, communities, and nations should control their own stories and the tools used in that storytelling. A couple of more quotes. Why does this matter? Because we have to be certain that not only it is for our individuals today, but for our futures. One of the main things that we teach in the discipline of Native American Studies is the idea that we lean on our ancestors from our generations before us, so that those who are unborn 7 generations ahead of us will have the same place to be and live on this earth as we do. So we lean on those teachings from the past to ensure the future, and to do so in a manner that is done with respect, care, reciprocity, wisdom, love, humility today. So examples of some expressive sovereignty that I wanted to mention. And I titled this one, Expressive Sovereignty is War Cry. What do I mean by that? When we come together and dance at powwows, oftentimes you'll hear singers, or you'll even hear some of the dancers make this sound that it's this cry to the skies, or this cry to the earth, or cry to the nation. And in doing so, it is a declaration of who they are, being proud of who they are in that moment while they're dancing, or in that moment while they're singing. That declaration as war cry is should not necessarily be seen as something that is attached to the English root word of war. In fact, here I show a very distinct picture from Tasha Hubbard's film, We Will Stand Up, of a graphic artist who was asked to help tell this very complicated story of Cree history in Western Canada when the RCMP removed them, Indian people, from their homes and put them into forts and didn't necessarily want to feed them. That's not the story I want to talk about today. The story I want to talk has more to do with how do we, in our times of such action against us, how do we resist? As makers If you look to the right of the screen, there's the actual picture of a woman in Mi'kmaq territory. And she's holding a single eagle feather up against a line of police authority. This is a conversation we see in Indian country in the US and Canada in relation to pipelines. The makers here have taken that picture and created a sense of their own story to go with it. So Great Deal is one of the artists, and then Fanny Asia is the other artist here on the middle and then on the left. In being able to take this story and having it spread broader and wider than just the Maritimes of Canada, these artists were able to then honor this photographer by having their artwork out there and spread beyond so that word could get out through different types of media that this was taking place or did take place. Sometimes the idea of quote-unquote war might actually be peace. That woman is in a stance of peace. But she's defending her land. She's defending her territory against corporate extractive industries. Let me reiterate this and underscore this with the Onondaga word for warrior. The Onondaga word for warrior translates as to he or she who carries the burden of the people. He or she who carries the burden of the people. Nowhere in there is there a hint at conflict. Nowhere in that phrase is there a hint at fighting or war. Some of you in this audience, through who you are, may carry burdens that no one else knows about. Those are the terms that the Onondaga people believe make you a warrior by contributing to the community in that way. This is what I would say something that is kind of a paradigm shift from the Western dominant society way we think about warrior and how the indigenous people think about warrior. So that idea of the war cry and declaration while one is dancing, one is celebrating culture, one is out there being who they are, one dances to lift the burdens of their community. That's one of the reasons the jingle dress is such medicine. It's designed to help with healing. It is designed to help with lifting burdens of a family who maybe has a loved one who is sick. Another example of an artist who is, in a way I would propose softly trying to send a very intense message, is Erica Lord. She is Inuit and Finnish, and she went through a exercise where she tanned herself and she wrote messages on her body. On her body, in this particular picture, she wrote the message, half-breed. Not a very pleasant term to be identified as if you are an indigenous person. And so she purposefully used the idea of how one's skin color and the changing of one's skin color, there's a perception that goes with it of who is or who is not Native. And she's disrupting that. She's challenging that. She's not challenging it in a way that's aggressive or with conflict. In fact, this is a very subtle, soft picture. But she's looking at the camera too. She's looking at you. She wants you to see that message and know that message and how this is actually a harmful practice to make presumptions about people based on the color of their skin. Another art piece from Erica Lord is one that she's entitled Blood Quantum. Blood quantum is a term in Indian country that is contested within indigenous communities to say who or who is not Indian. And that blood quantum, as you can see the formula on her hand, 1/4 plus 1/16 equals 5/16. And we also notice on her arm that her arm is actually sliced in different pictures. These are different images that are put together so that her arm looks as though they were literally cut in pieces. Another legal political way to identify Indian people, and as Molly mentioned before, or maybe it was Annabella or both, we weren't supposed to still be here. This was one of the ways that could be assured of that from the federal government of both the US and Canada. So again, not necessarily artwork that is going to cause a lot of conversation without having that historical reference, having that context of indigenous communities. Angry Anook is a film by Alethea Arnacook-Barrell, also Inuit. It is the story of a community of seal hunters. And this story will turn anybody's perception upside down, the audience's perception upside down about the significance of why Native people need to be included in conversations of policy, and why they need to be included in conversations of lifeways. The Inuit people experienced what they call a depression in the mid-1980s, when the seal hunting became very unpopular due to, for lack of a better word, propaganda against the idea of hunting quote-unquote baby seals. So laws were made in nation states such as Canada, across the European Union. The Inuit who live with and depend on the lives of seals were not included in these conversations. It turned out that these messages actually weren't even in the right geography or territory for where the Inuit are hunting. And because the people who are making these decisions voted against the Inuit had to just live with it. And this happened again as recently as 2010, 2011. They are fighting for their livelihoods because they can't necessarily grow food where they live. They can't afford to go to the grocery store to buy a gallon of milk, which for us might be a few dollars. For them, it's astronomical. They rely on subsistence hunting to survive. The Inuit, several times through the filmmaker, begged the activists to meet with them, begged leaders of the Sierra Club, Greenpeace, all the organizations that many of us believed we are doing good work, but they wouldn't talk with the Inuit about this issue. In the end, I'm not going to give away the ending because I would hope that some of you who are maybe in the film studies area might actually pick this film up, Angry Anook, and view it to see the power of messaging, the power of misrepresentation, and what it takes to start reconciliation. That's all within this film, Angry Enough. Dislocation Blues is another short film out there on the web under Sky Hopinka's website. Sky Hopinka is Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin and Pechanga out of California. He is a genius, a MacArthur Genius Grant Award winner from a couple of years ago. He is so gracious with his films, though the majority of his shorts are out on his website, so anybody can go. He wants people to have access to his work. He did a short contribution to the 2016 Standing Rock Water Protectors Gathering in the face of, again, military presence, police authority presence. He made a lovely contribution as a maker, again, to say, how am I going to do things different? How do I take responsibility and use the subjects with care and respect, when in many cases, a lot of the cameras that were there from mainstream media wanted pictures and faces of some of the protesters, and I use that on purpose, protectors instead of protesters, but those images could be used against them. And so Sky Hopinka said, no, I'm not going to necessarily do that. So he instead tells a different story visually through his interviews with his subjects, and purposefully does not necessarily shoot people's faces with his camera. This is one of the subjects that he has, and this was after the Standing Rock protests were done, and he's interviewing one of the subjects that was there and present. Earlier I shared a clip on, or not a clip, but a slide on We Will Stand Up from Tasha Hubbard. This is a painted image of a young man by the name of Colton Bushy. Colton Bushy, as you can probably discern from the image on the screen, is no longer with us. He was shot by a farmer in Saskatchewan, and his family went through quite an experience after this shooting. They went through the court process, they went through trials and public ridicule. His family received harassing emails, harassing social media posts. He was the one that was shot. Tasha Hubbard, as a filmmaker, decides to take that camera and bear witness, be present to bear witness of what took place in the following months after Colton Bushy's murder. Again, I don't want to necessarily give away the end of this story in hopes that maybe somebody will pick up the film on their own to watch it. But Tasha Hubbard's film, what it does, as I was saying with some of the other artists earlier, is it's a declaration. It itself is the war cry. The film is saying, we are still here, but we also need to be respected while we're still here. I'm going to lighten the mood up a little bit. Stephen Paul Judd is a Choctaw artist, also from Oklahoma. Him and Sterling Harjo are good friends. I had the privilege of meeting them on our campus a couple decades ago when they were young pups. Now they're out there in the world making amazing things happen. Stephen Paul Judd is toying with the idea of Star Wars. He's disrupting probably this multiple messages with the top one, actually. He's disrupting this idea of how some of us have grown up to know the original Princess Leia and what she looked like. And at the same time sends a message for the last time My great-great-grandmother was a Hopi Indian princess. That's what makes me a princess. Princess Leia. So he's playing with George Lucas's character in this top image that he's put together because the Hopi women traditionally would wear their hair in this way. And then suddenly, one of George Lucas's characters from one of the largest film franchises in history shows up wearing the same hairstyle. So he's sort of poking. He's poking at the Star Wars kingdom, if you will. In addition, he takes some of the other characters, some more of the technical characters and machines, and puts them out on the plains, the Lakota plains, to say, what if? What if we imagine a world where Indians and these future or past from a long place and faraway galaxy would ever merge and be in that same space? So Stephen Paul Judd is wanting to draw on some humor, but still make a comment and still make his own point with regards to his visual work. Last one with Stephen Paul Judd, Still Here. This is something that I have repeated in my talk because throughout society today, there has been, as I said earlier, a purposeful renegotiation of Indian representation and construction because non-Indian people have been doing the construction. I'm here to say, as makers from any background, respect the subjects. Create work that's going to lift the burden of your community. Create work that might disrupt dominant narratives that work to erase other people's narratives. Because Indian people are still here, and Indian people deserve to be respected. We all do. With that, I will say thank you. Miigwech, Iyawan. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, everyone. And